All right. Y'all know how I am with this whole me recording myself and all that. So you should be used to it now by now. But I did another recording, right? And I'm going to go through it. I actually did this recording yesterday and I was talking about the resorts. It was based off resorts that we traveled to. It was some video that I was watching that made me kind of like think about that. And it's all tied to resorts, money, Epstein files, all these different things, right? So I'm going to go ahead and go through it. I used to always wonder, like when we would travel, we went to the Bahamas. People go to, that was like a very popular place to travel. And people go to these places, right? Like they go to Mexico, they go to Cuba and Puerto Rico and all of these places that they consider third world countries. Only so many people, which are more like your high-end people, travel to like places in Europe and places like that where it's super expensive. It's way more expensive to travel. So you kind of think that as a regular civilian that you're doing something by going to these third world countries, you're traveling outside of the US, which has a border on it and it shouldn't. They make you pay all these different expenses in order to travel, like a passport, the extremely expensive airplane ticket, insurance on it, so much high prices for the hotels in these resorts, which most people stay at the resorts because it has been stigmatized that if you stay amongst the civilians, it's dangerous, right? Especially since you're a U.S. citizen and you are no longer on U.S. soil, so you are no longer under the protection of the United States, the corporation. So essentially, right, we go and we travel on a yearly basis to all these different places, these different resorts. There are some people that'll go to Europe, right? That'll go to Israel. There's a lot of people that are going to Dubai right now. But a lot of people go to like Mexico and things like that. You're really expensive. You'll go to different places in Europe and whatever. However, when you go to all these different places, typically they'll stay at the resorts. Like I mentioned before, when we went to the Bahamas, that's all we did pretty much was stayed at the resort. I think there was only one day when we actually interacted with the community that was there and spent our money in the community. However, what you're doing is every single time you travel, you're not putting any of your money into the community. You're not putting any money into that territory that you're going to. All of the money is going to the people that own the resort. Now, can you imagine who actually owns the resorts? Especially if the US is telling you, oh, if you travel outside of the US, don't go outside of the resorts, at least you not have any type of US protection. So we're already outsourcing all of our businesses out there. Meanwhile, those people are still subjected to being impoverished. But we're busy just traveling over there for fun, so to speak. You're no longer protected by those laws. So they say, don't go over there with the locals, right? Because they don't tell what could actually happen to you. But at least if you stay on the resorts, then you have some type of protection. So that tells you who owns the resorts. Typically, the resorts are all inclusive, and they come with packages. That's where they get you. The all inclusive, the packages, and everything like that. So again, you're taking all of your hard earned money. We already know that it's expensive to travel. You have to purchase the passports, which are super expensive. The airplane tickets are super expensive. All these different means that we have to travel are extremely expensive. I mean, unless you are like some type of millionaire, billionaire, multimillionaire, or whatever like that with your own private jet, which those are even expensive to purchase. They kind of make it almost impossible for us to travel without spending a huge amount of our own hard-earned dollars, putting our money back into fluctuation into the economy. But instead of it going to these countries that we're actually visiting who could use the US dollars, it's going right back to our government or whoever it is that's in power. Things that you can do where they have you basically staying on the resort. You're hardly traveling out to where the locals are, where their actual businesses are, for them to make a solid, decent income. Because I'm pretty sure the people that are working on the resort are making minimum wage. And they probably have some type of NDA where they're not allowed to disclose this information or say anything about it to us. And they'd probably be looking at us, especially Black people, like, y'all have no idea. And we don't. We're not supporting the local communities, so the local communities themselves can stay impoverished because there's no assistance that's coming in from all the people that are traveling to their country. It's exploitation at its best. If they were allowed or had any type of allowance for allowing other people to come in and travel to their country where they were able to that be able to be taxed or however, I don't know how they do that financially, but if there was something where it actually went to benefit the community or to benefit their government, it would lessen a lot of the financial burden that a lot of those other countries have that they keep coming over to the US for. But we're busy traveling over there for fun and not circulating in their economy. Government, schooling, housing, but of course the government's not going to benefit anybody else's government. So that's number one. But number two, and they're just not going to allow the communities to thrive. But see, then because the communities are not thriving and they are impoverished, this is where you get the support of high prostitution, especially amongst the families, where they will allow their daughters and sons to prostitute themselves for money. Can you imagine that? We're busy traveling to countries that are so impoverished that they actually will exploit their own children and allow them to become prostitutes in order to bring in income. Yet we are traveling outside to their countries to these resorts that are privately owned. To bring in income because those places are so impoverished when really they have no reason to be. Not with the way we travel to them. Whoever owns all of these resorts is the one who is benefiting from people doing all of this expensive, unnecessarily expensive traveling. Meanwhile, while those third world countries stay impoverished, they link to prostitution, which also opens up the door for travel prostitution. People that are traveling and now all of a sudden sleeping with all these young. those countries like Bangladesh and places like that, all these other countries that have extremely low age of consent. Can you imagine the reasons why? If this is all tied to it, right? They're so impoverished that they need to prostitute themselves in order to make means, in order to find a way to get by financially. But then you're lowering the age of consent. Now, most of the people that travel to places like in Asia and things of that nature that have these extremely low ages of consent, the demographic is white people. And the reason why I bring that up is because, again, in the US, it's like 75% or whatever like that of white men that make up the US, but 92% of them are convicted pedophiles. But if they're traveling to these third world countries, which I go into this in this recording, if they're traveling to these third world countries where they're used to being able to sleep with youthful people, whether that be boy or girl, then that almost becomes like an appetite, an obsession, almost like a drug, something that you know that you have access to. You just have to figure out how to get it. Younger kids, and typically where you'll find that at, the demographic in which you'll find that at is white men. So no wonder why. I mean, they have access to it. If you have access to that much youth, then that becomes like it's not just a fetish, it becomes almost like an obsession. Because now you know you have access to it. It's like drugs. It's like alcohol. It may be illegal, but you have access to it. People have access to it. Cocaine is illegal, but people have access to it and they do it. That also opens up the door for human trafficking. Especially because the law of the sea, there are no borders in the sea. Therefore, they can get away with so much more when it comes to trafficking, drugs, humans, weapons, anything of that nature. It was probably about 2 years ago. I did a video about the law of the land and the law of the sea. I'll redo it because I'm overdue for doing that video again anyway, but I'll go through it again and make it a future post. But there is a difference between the law of the land and the law of the sea. And basically with the law of the land, it just depends on whatever territory you're in, right? When in Rome, do what the Romans do. So if you're on this land, on this soil, you have to abide by these laws. That's just how that is. But the law of the water is something that's completely different. And that's where we get this whole notion, another notion of mermaids from, right? I talk about water births. That could be a portion of mermaids. They talk about a lot of different horrific encounters that sailors have had with creatures in the ocean that kind of have a mimic of like a human being or a humanoid, but would sound like a siren. Those are considered mermaids. But then because you have this word mer, which means sea, it's referring to the oceans, referring to the water, you have these merchants. That's where they came from, and that's what they were referred to in the Bible. Merchants, right? They were water people, but they also were the ones who established trade. They did a lot of exchange when it came to money. That's the reason why money has so many different water references to it, like liquid assets and cash flow, frozen accounts, currency, right? Currency, like the current in the ocean. It has a lot of different water references, and that's the reason why you have merchants, people who deal with trade. So going into things like that, you have the law of the land and the law of the sea. The only difference is that there's not a lot of different laws of the seas because you cannot establish borders there. You can do that with lands because you can mark it. you know? But you can't do that with the sea. You can't actually establish borders, or they just don't. They don't make up those laws. So in that aspect, in this now area, when you're through the ocean, when you're going through the land, when you're going through the sea, since there are no actual laws that are controlling it, you can send about the drugs, the human trafficking of children and other adults, right? Weapons, different things like that. It's not just criminals that do these things, but criminals do them because they understand that there are no laws when it comes to the sea. It's just how you get about your product through the land. And I'm not enticing or advising any of you all to become criminals. Just what I'm saying, that this is what they do. However, they also mimic the people who put these laws in place because they were the first ones. They were the first criminals. Our government is the first criminal. Our government are the first criminals. They're the first gangsters. They're the first all of that. But they also do these things as well. They transport weapons, they transport humans, and they transport drugs across the sea. The only difference is I did a video not too long ago where I tell you that the people that are in the government, they consider themselves above the law. However, you are underneath the law. That's called the understanding. And that's the reason why you can be penalized for doing those crimes, and they can't. The exact same thing that they are penalizing regular civilians for doing in order to make a buck, the government itself are doing the exact same thing, and yet arresting regular citizens and calling them criminals when they're operating underneath a criminal basis themselves. And then if you have millionaires, specific millionaires and billionaires that own these resorts, clearly through real estate, you can own it underneath a quiet name so that nobody knows who it's protection for the person who is the actual owner of either the real estate or the trust, or you can say. So I actually had to look up the actual specification or the actual name of it. They're the land trust, the privacy friendly LLCs. They're also nominee trustees, and they're enhanced title insurance that they have for these people who are purchasing property, real estate, or trusts underneath the guise of someone else. Okay, so I think that it was just recently something that came out, some type of business where everybody thought that a particular person was the owner, and that's just because Google tells you that's who the owner is. But when you reveal the true nature and the legal documentation of who owned it, it ended up being the Rothschilds, right? They say that all of these companies that we spend our money at, these are housed underneath a bunch of different other sister companies, right? And that's because all of these sister companies are branched underneath one company who's owned by literally one entity who has one person, or like one of 13 families that's actually running it. We just think that they're owned by other people, other businesses, but those are just the faces that are in front of it. That's just like the NFL and the NBA and everything like that. You just have the faces, the players. That's the face of the NBA. But who's actually the real person that's running the show? That's the question. So at the end of the day, you have all these different resorts that include human sex trafficking, prostitution, all these different things that we keep considering illegal, that is also involved in these Epstein files. But again, Epstein is just the face as of now, the one who is in front of everybody else who is guilty of all of these crimes. The reasons why there is no end to asking for the release of all of the names of people involved in these Epstein files, but they're not going to do that. However, here's the problem. They're going to have so many different names and guises that there's going to be other people behind those names and those guises. And in these resorts, whoever owns on documentation these resorts, there's going to be someone legally who is over that person. It's going to be a continuous web that we would have to dig ourselves out of in order to figure out. But when you have protection clauses like these, where the owner of the trust or the business or the resort can stay anonymous, it's almost difficult to uncover who owns what, who's tied to what, without just specific proof, which is what the Epstein files are, or pure confession.
Oh, Tony Strickland owns this piece of property, this land, this real estate, over 40,000 acres. It's huge, it's a castle, but technically, Tony is not the owner of that huge estate or that castle. A Rothschild is, or like someone of those families actually are. So then we wonder, how is it that they have this opportunity to have so many different estates? So many different operations, so many different guises. How are they able to operate in these different realms? And that is how and why they do it underneath the guise of someone else's name. That way their name stays protected. So when they say that there are multiple Epsteins, and multiple Epstein islands, most likely these islands are owned and controlled by someone who is not in the public on document, not legally, but on documentation will show that somebody else actually owns it. But the thing is, for what? For what? That's the part that I don't understand. If money is paper, if money is actually paper, and they should know that, right? That it's monopoly money, it doesn't truly exist. We print it every day. You want paper? We can just print it. I mean, why? Aside from ensuring that the masses stay confused, I mean, I guess, no, that still don't make no sense.
And I'm trying to go through it with my head with the money, right? Because we know that money is just paper. It's just printed, right? Printed paper. They can consistently print paper. At one point in time, the dollar was backed by gold. It's no longer backed by gold. So what is actually saving the dollar? And that could be the reason why the dollar is also going down. Or not the only reason, but a contribution to everything else that is happening. However, when you take out a loan, right? When you go to a bank and you take out a loan, you're like, I need a car loan for this $50,000 vehicle. What they do is they open up a bank account in your name, and they NSF essentially the account by the $50,000. You make your payments to the bank, but that payment is actually going to that account. Once that account hits zero, well, then you've paid off your loan. They issue you the title, and now you own a piece of that, you own that property. However, a lot of people don't believe that that's exactly what's happening, but that is exactly how they actually create these loans. So essentially, the dollar doesn't actually exist. There is no power in it. There is no actual money in it. And that's me just going through this entire notion. And if you're probably like, well, how do you know that? I have over 20 years in banking. So, manager for a bank, over 20 plus years, 10 plus years in underwriting, and I held my mortgage license for 2 years. So, I have some experience in the information and what I'm actually talking about.
Without them moving money around like that and this and the third, it would lose our power, or not our power, but our ability to believe that money is powerful. But again, if they can print paper, why the hell do they need to do this? That just, unless it's a form of control. He who controls the accounts and dollars and banks of everybody, of those around them, by saying, okay, I'm going to make sure that I'm going to create a product and you're going to like it and you're going to love it, and opposed to you saving your hard-earned money and not participating in the economy. I'm going to create a product that you're going to love so much that you will have no choice but to purchase it. And it's going to be so expensive and so ridiculous, but because there's this really cool person that you absolutely adore because it's one of your favorite people on the planet,
Michael Jordan,
not knowing
Kobe
that
Bryant.
Person themselves will murder their own mother to become a multi-billionaire.
Kanye West. He talks about sacrificing his own mother in order to get where he is, and look at where he is now.
You'll purchase this product because they said so. And I guess for people who don't know any better, you can use that money to bribe stupid people. And you bribe them with the money, and then you force them to purchase outlandish things in order to give the money back. That's how.
And Kanye actually talks about that in one of his interviews that he does. He's like, they'll put you in this magnificent position where you have all this money, and then they'll entice you. Hey, you got to have a home. And once you buy this big, lavish home, it's like you're consistently doing upgrades to it, and you're never actually catching up with anything because you're busy remodeling it, trying to make sure that it's the biggest extravagant home that you can have, because the people that are surrounding you, right, your handlers are telling you, you got to put the money, your money into your home. And then you start buying all these cars. Now, before you know it, you've got 2, 3 homes. He's had, I don't know what interview this was, but I remember him specifically saying that during an interview. He's like, you'll get all of this money, but you basically give it back because they entice you to buy all of these extravagant things that you don't need. And that's why there's a lot of different rappers and artists that'll say, oh yeah, the jewelry that I'm wearing is fake, because why would I go and buy like these expensive jewelry and wear it out, especially with no security? Even if they have security, look at how many people's celebrities' homes gets broken into. A lot of them will rent jewelry, won't even actually own it, will rent their houses and won't own it because they don't want to give that money back, right? But it's all like a power play on money for control.
How the money is circulating. But they print dollars every day, so it's literally monopoly money. They can print dollars, but we have a lot of energy that we put towards money. Perhaps what they need to circulate is the energy. The energy that surrounds the purpose for what the funds were being used for, or what the intent was to use the money for. I've heard about stories of people on social media, YouTube specifically, talking to content creators that are religious or delve into spirituality, supernatural, demons, things like that. And they talk about being former witches and how that comes with a lot of money, because when you have that much power, people that are higher up look to use your power or to use you to do spells.
So I started going off on this other tangent, right? Talking about the money, because again, it's like, well, what is the point of that? And it all has to come back down to control. Now, we'll see witches and celebrities, right? They call the Kardashian witches, which I go into that, and I'm going to leave that alone until I go into that, because I say something very specific about it. But if you look at majority of the people that are true witches, powerful witches, you don't see them flashing around. Matter of fact, you don't really see them in public. They don't tell you that they're a witch. So you have no idea if they have money or not. Sometimes, a lot of times, they actually just dress very homelessly, like homely. Like you're looking at them like, you can't really have much money, yet they're multi-millionaires. Because these people in power, apparently not all of them have the power in order to do certain things. They can read all types of books, they can do all types of rituals, they can do all types of things. However, there are very specific people on this earth that are what you would call natural born witches, that really know how to will energy and power to them and then send it out into the universe in order to make things happen. Those are the people that they use. But see, those are the people that you don't really see in public.
So, clearly, not all of them even know how to do a lot of stuff. There's probably certain people that literally are just gifted enough or powerful enough in order to create certain things based on their energy, their intent, their focus, their ability to will energy to themselves and consume energy, and then probably cast it out into the universe in order to allow it to manifest. There's probably certain people that are extremely natural when it comes to that. However, here's the thing. They say the Kardashians are witches, but probably what they do is probably stupid. Who knows what type of magic they do? They have candles and things like that. They have their crosses that they wear. They definitely do a lot of sex.
And if you notice, there's a lot of people in Hollywood that consider themselves Christians, and they say that they praise God, but they all have this specific cross that they tattoo on themselves, or that they'll put in stitches on their clothing. And that's actually a demonic cross. That has nothing to do with Christianity.
So it's almost like Aleister Crowleyanism type sexual energy magic that they, in allurement that they use. But see, beauty and sex sells. And that seems to be where they lose a lot of everything else. They say Skims is super popular, but we don't live in LA, so I don't know who all is wearing Skims. but it's showing that that's not even, I don't know. They seem to be doing a lot of money laundering themselves. So I don't know who knows the truth.
Especially with that church that they have. They make their members give mandatory tithes and memberships that they have to pay. Especially like even the family members, they have to put a specific amount of funds in there. And you know that when it comes to the churches, they're not taxed. Especially if they follow the rules. So it's very interesting to see how that family still holds themselves up financially when all that they really offer is their beauty, which is fading because they're getting older. And that's the reason why they have to consistently get the cosmetic surgeries that they've been getting since they've been youthful. You know, I don't think that they've actually ever enjoyed their youth. But if they're witches, then the number one spell casting that they're doing is basically beauty in order for them to get their money. So clearly they're not that very powerful themselves. That's where you get that, whoever that Bromlovich woman is with the black fingers, she, I think, is super powerful. There's something wrong with her fingers that's natural. Y'all think that that is makeup. That's not makeup. They say that real witches develop black fingers from pointing so much and doing so much spell casting. And actually, I'm going to stop the video right here because I kind of go into different things where I talk about Aleister Crowley, and then I talk about Enochianism because it's all about the witchcraft, right? And I was trying to go through a tangent, trying to figure out where all this stuff was put together. I'm putting together a timeline on how a lot of this stuff translated from, you know, at least from the 14th century all the way to where it is now here in the United States, and how did that hit. And actually, if you see the timeline that I'm putting together, just to give you a brief synopsis, right? You had Russian icons in the 1400s, and I show that book of Russian icons, and they were all African, of African descent. So in Russia, in Europe, in the 14th century, which would have been from 1300s to 1400s. In the 14th century, there was nothing but African people in Europe because that's when we were traveling out. Then you had the Spanish Inquisition, which started in 1436, right? And it lasted until roughly about like 1630 something. That was when they started rounding up a lot of the Africans and putting them into slavery. So then you had 1619 all the way to the 1800s when you had slavery. But here's the thing. 1619, you had slavery. 1700, early 1700 was the establishment of Freemasonry. In Freemasonry, they did a lot of anal sex with young boys. Now, before that, prior to this, right? Prior to all of that was John Dee with the British, and nope, still there. So 1700, you had the establishment of the Freemasons with the anal sex. Then 1779 was the establishment, or 1776, I think it was the establishment of the U.S. when they came here. And then in the early 1800s, I forget exactly if it was 1801 or 1804, was John Dee and him doing his prognostication towards the British Queen, right? He was the first one who was like the establisher of Enochian magic all of a sudden, right? But prior to that, again, 1916 was the establishment of slavery. And in that time period, they would say that voodoo and hoodoo all of a sudden came into fruition because the slaves did not want to be slaves. They started to conjure up their ancient powers in order to go against their slave masters. But somebody had to have taught the slave master how to do some of this stuff, because then all of a sudden, after the establishment of the U.S., you had all this Enochian magic and everything like that, that somebody was like, oh, I know how to do prognostication. I know how to perform necromancy and all this stuff, right? Then the late 1800s, you had whatever that guy's name is, who was the first Wiccan. And then right in the 1800s, you had the Salem witch trials. It's something really weird with the matchup of witchcraft surrounding slavery, the Spanish Inquisition, and them getting rid of all the Africans that actually dwelled in Europe. There is a connection between all of this and when they started to whitewash our history. And it all starts right there. But they call that the medieval period, and they also call it the Dark Ages. And I've heard that the word about that was that the Dark Ages was referring to the time period when Black people were kings and queens of all what you would call Europe now. Black and white was a status. It just meant that you had money. But then when you referred to a white person, etymology wise, they were called blay, which also meant black. There was this very strange switch. And that's the reason why I'm like super obsessed with certain different time periods. Again, 4000 BCE, I'm super obsessed with those ancestors. But then this time period where you had between slavery, between the development of, and that was the other thing, because Freemasonry started early 1700s. They came here to the US to bring that nasty behavior. Freemasonry was all about those rich white people getting together and essaying little boys. And then they brought that to the New World when they established it here in the US. They got rid of the people that were in the US. They had already had the Spanish Inquisition, so they had a lot of people in position where they wanted them. Well, at least the Africans, they had them tied where they wanted them tied. John Dee then was the prognosticator to the Queen of Britain. And then all of a sudden, you had Aleister Crowley, 1860s, 1875. He was part of the Golden Dawn. Actually, after they kicked him out of the Golden Dawn, he established his own order, his own lodge. But the thing is, he was extremely instrumental to what Freemasonry became. Because not only did he practice Enochian magic, he practiced a lot of sex magic. This is where you get chaos magic. This is where you get a lot of the weird establishments. The tarot was already established, but then when you had this curse that was placed on it, this is the time period in which it happened. Because those tarot cards that y'all are working with, those were produced by Aleister Crowley and another woman that was part of the Golden Dawn. I forget her name. I think that her name was like Jane or something like that. But those are the tarot cards that y'all are playing with to this day. So all of it has curses on it. It has rites on it. It has rituals on it. It has sex magic on it. It has chaos magic on it. But then because he was part of the Freemasons, which all they were doing at that point in time were doing weird rituals and essaying little boys, he included all of this magic stuff that he was learning from the Enochian magic. And Enochian magic is what they consider King Solomon. King Solomon and the lesser key of Solomon. Those are all of those witch spells, in which those witch spells come from 4000 BCE. Now, when I say that BCE, I was getting ready to say BC, and the only reason why I say it as BCE, because I call it as just a common era, right? Before the common era, after the common era. There was somebody that mentioned all of this time is surrounded by Jesus. And I told you, Jesus is the Son, the S-U-N. But time is marked between Jesus's life and Jesus's death. And all of these people are Freemasons, especially the ones who established the Bible. The reason why you have the name Jesus is because it is it is parallel or synonymous with the name Zeus. And the person who changed time is Julius Caesar. He gave us the Gregorian calendar. That is exactly who they talk about in the book of Revelation. Who would have thought to have changed time? He did. But during that time frame, he also added and subtracted during certain months. And that's the reason why we have two different notions and praises to Julius, because Annuarius and January, there's a praise and worship to him. And July, there's another praise and worship to him again. Then in August, we praise his successor, Augustus, his son. In June, we worship his wife, Juno. But the thing is, July, that's worship to Julius. And there was a poet back then who tied his name famously to Zeus, said that he was from the lineage of Zeus. That's the reason why so many people gave so much praise to Julius Caesar before he became super greedy, and then they went on ahead and betrayed him. But the thing is that a lot of his ritualistic things in Greece, they had what was called Capitol Hill, and that was an actual mountain. And that's the reason why our government uses Capitol Hill to this day. It's all Zeus worship, Julius Caesar worship, and that's the reason why we have a notion called Jesus. It's under the guise of someone who is supposed to give us salvation, when it is the S-U-N. So thank you so much for watching. Like, comment, share, and you'll be seeing me soon.